With can be considered as a traditional tape system. When the module powers on, the tape is stopped. We refer to this state as being in Nav mode, as indicated by the orange light. Press play to start the tape. We don't hear anything because nothing is recorded yet, but notice the lights above the toggle. Press play to stop the tape again. Now, the module is back in Nav mode, as indicated by the orange light to the left and above the toggle. Press play to enter live mode. The lights above the toggle now indicate that we're in live mode. Let's plug a sound source into With. Rewind to hear what we just recorded by holding the toggle down in Nav mode. With treats tape motion in both directions as equal. Hold the toggle down in Nav mode to rewind and press play to latch into live mode with reverse playback. In live mode, we can control the speed of playback by pressing play and flicking the toggle up to double or down to halve the speed. Let's learn a little bit more about recording. By default, With is in overdub mode, meaning the sounds you record are layered sound on sound over what was already on the tape. Let's see this in action. Overdub mode is indicated by the record white LED being illuminated. When I now rewind, we'll hear both of those sounds played back simultaneously. With can erase material previously recorded onto the tape by recording in overwrite mode. We enter overwrite mode by pressing and holding the record button and flicking the toggle down. Record mode is indicated by both the orange and white LEDs above record being illuminated. With will also easily record your audio at different speeds, so the same sound source recorded at different speeds will be pitched up or down depending on if it was recorded at a slower speed or a faster tape speed. We can erase a section of tape by playing over it with overwrite recording enabled. In order to erase more quickly, we might want to make the tape go as fast as possible. That wraps up the basic functionality for playing the tape and recording to it in Nav and Live mode. Now that we know how to record material to the tape and play it back, let's learn how to organize our material using cue points. Cue points can be added in a number of ways. For now, we'll focus on adding cue points in live mode. We're going to record a few different sounds to the tape and add cue points by flicking the toggle down to mark the different sections. Notice that whenever we flick the toggle down in live mode to add a cue point, the orange light above loop illuminates. That's because we have just effectively crossed a cue point on the tape. When not in looping mode, crossing cue points on the tape is indicated visually by the lights above loop. Flicking up in live mode will add a cue point, jump the playhead back to the previous cue point, turn on looping, and turn off recording. Now that we're looping between these two cue points, our location within the loop is indicated by the lights above loop. In both live and nav mode, we can navigate to different cue points by pressing loop and flicking up or down to go forward or backward. In live and nav mode, we can turn on or off looping by pressing the loop button. As we pass the next cue point on the tape, we should see it visually indicated moving from right to left above the loop button. Loop and up or down works the same way to navigate to cue points even when not looping. In nav mode, cue navigation lets us jump directly to a cue point, meaning the orange light above loop will be illuminated. Note that looping works the same even if we're manually controlling the playhead by rewinding or fast forwarding with the toggle in nav mode. Now let's learn about CV in nav mode by plugging a simple offset from ColdMac into that. In nav mode, the jack labeled that controls the speed of playback just like the toggle. So sending positive voltages linearly increases the playback speed from 0 to 2x speed, and sending in negative voltages linearly decreases the tape speed from 0 to negative 2x speed. Just as when fast forwarding or rewinding with the toggle in nav mode, the lights above play will still indicate the direction and speed of playback when we use a CV instead. Now we're going to turn on looping to help us understand what this jack does in nav mode. You have to imagine all the cue points on the tape evenly distributed from negative 5 volts to 5 volts. Now, if a cable is plugged into this, then whenever the playhead hits a cue point, it'll jump to a different cue point, determined by the voltage presently at this. Since we're presently looping, whenever we hit the end of a loop, we'll jump to a new loop determined by the voltage at this, or stay at the same loop if the voltage hasn't changed since we haven't set a new index. We're hearing silence now because we jumped to the cue point at the head of the tape, where there is lots of blank tape before our first recording and the first manually added cue point. So far, we've talked about nav mode and live mode. Now let's talk about the third mode, cue mode. Cue mode is used to edit cues. Well, in particular, it's used to move cues, add new cues, and to delete cues. With the addition of CV, it can also be used as a volt per octave sampler, but we'll cover that another time. We're currently in nav mode, but let's press play to go to live mode and hear the material that I've prepared on the tape for us. So we have a cue point and 2 tones, and then another cue point at the end of the recording. I'll press loop and down twice to navigate to the first of our 2 cue points. Next, I'll press loop and record simultaneously to enter cue mode, as indicated by the light above the toggle. Now let's look at the loop lights and the record lights. The loop light indicates that we're at the start of a loop because the orange light is fully illuminated and the white light is very dim. The record light is orange. This is something new to cue mode. This means that we are currently at a cue point. When I press play, we'll be able to audition playback from our current location, which currently coincides with our currently selected cue point. When we press play, we'll play from here and loop through this loop until we release play. Now, when we release play, the playhead will automatically reset to our current location before we pressed play. Next, let's pay attention to what happens to the record light when we press play. It's going to switch to light, indicating the playhead is no longer coinciding with our currently selected cue point. But when we release it, it resets to the original location, so the light switches back to orange. With this in mind, we can now understand how to actually move the cursor around while the tape is stopped to a new location to either move our currently selected cue or add a new cue. Let's move the playhead forward from the cue point at the start of our loop by holding the toggle up, as if we're fast forwarding. Now let's nudge it backwards to just before the second tone starts. Now let's get it positioned just after that tone starts. The light above record is still white because we're not actually at a cue point since we haven't relocated our first cue point by pressing record. But instead, let's add a new cue point by pressing loop and record. Now we can exit back to nav mode by pressing the loop button. And we now have 3 cue points on the tape, meaning we have 2 loops, one with just the first tone and a smidgen of the second, and a second loop with just the second tone. Let's go back to cue mode. Notice the white LED above record isn't lit because we're not at a cue point. Let's go to the middle cue point by pressing loop and up. While the cursor's at a cue point in cue mode, meaning the orange light is lit, we can delete that cue by pressing record. The record LED is now white since we're no longer at a cue point, but it's as if we have the first cue point selected again, but let's just jump back to that cue point. Let's actually move this cue point this time by holding the toggle up to fast forward into this loop and then pressing record to save the first cue point into this new location. This time we actually relocated our first cue point into this current location. Let's go back to nav mode and pay attention to the lights above loop to see the cue points in their actual locations on the tape as we pass them. Now that first cue point should no longer be at the start of the first tone, but rather right where the 2 tones meet. What if you want to quickly delete a bunch of cue points without erasing all the audio on your tape? Let's go to cue mode, navigate to the last cue that you want to delete, and then press record a bunch of times, effectively deleting a cue point and then relocating the previous cue point to this location and then deleting it and then relocating the one before that and then deleting that. That just about does it for cue mode. There's a few other features, but I'll let you refer to the manual for those. Now let's learn about CV in live mode. First, we'll learn about this. Mangrove is just having its pitch sequenced by teletype, and it's being filtered by 3 sisters, but nothing special. Currently, width is looping, but we should just be hearing the live signal, nothing recorded onto the tape. I'll plug a trigger source into this. Sending a trigger in will punch in, or in other words, turn recording on. Since we're recording into a loop, Mangrove should start playing back against itself now. Sending a second trigger will punch out or turn recording off. Pretty easy to understand. Now let's only listen to what's on the tape by completely filtering out Mangrove. Now we'll learn about that in live mode by plugging a simple offset from Cold Mac into the that jack. In live mode, CVs at that give access to a full spectrum of recording possibilities between overdubbing and overwriting. At 0 volts, we're in overdub mode. But as we decrease the voltage towards -5 volts, we begin attenuating what's on the tape before it gets played, thus approaching full overwrite mode. Since Mangrove has been completely filtered out and we're effectively overwriting, we're essentially erasing this tape loop right now. Even if I let some of Mangrove's signal back through, we still won't hear it a second time through the loop because it'll get erased before being played back. If I move the voltage back towards 0 volts, we'll effectively enter overdubbing mode again. Width is currently behaving like an additive looper would. If we increase the voltage towards +5 volts, something interesting happens. What's on the tape will be played back, and then it'll be attenuated before going back to the record head, whereas at -5 volts, it would be attenuated first, and then played back, and then sent to the record head. This means that from 0 to 5 volts, the control voltage is essentially acting as a feedback control on a delay line. This means that from 0 to 5 volts, we can effectively control how far we can hear into the past.